A larger-than-life businessman gunned down in his office.
But will the discovery of his secret double life lead to the killer? An all-new 2020 starts right now.
So in broad daylight, a man is shot dead in his place of business on a busy street.
I knew as soon as I saw it. I knew he was gone.
Just 2 blocks behind me, Bob Idman was found robbed and murdered.
Bob Idman was shot 3 times. That 3rd shot is being an execution.
I just all the way there saying, no, 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 Bob, no, Bob.
There were just floods and floods of police cars coming in and just total chaos.
We're with the Major Case Squad.
They only have 5 days, so the clock is ticking.
Diane found out on the site that her husband had been murdered.
Yes, she did.
She makes this statement, something like this has happened before.
There were numerous individuals who could have done something such as this.
He asked me a question that just kind of floored me. He said, "We're trying to find out about your brother's lifestyle."
What is it like to all of a sudden learn that there's this whole other secret part of his life?
People are going to find out some stuff they're probably not going to like.
June 8th, 2007 was a typical day in St. Charles. It was a sunny day when I was proceeding southwest here on First Capitol Drive.
So it was about to break 80 degrees on this Friday morning around 11 a.m. And as Officer Dean Meyer's patrol car is making its way toward Interstate 70, a mail carrier was on her rounds too. This security video showing her dropping off mail at a strip mall grocery store, then driving her truck a few doors down to enter the office where Bob Idman sold car insurance. Nobody heard her first scream.
Our mail carrier was running up the street, and she was flailing her arms, and she was yelling for the police.
Deborah Kennedy was the first person to hear those desperate cries and tried to catch up with her as the mail carrier ran into traffic on the busy road before Officer Meyer spotted her.
I saw the mail carrier running up the hill with the phone in her hand.
Stop, please, stop. There's a man. I'm delivering the mail right now. He's lying on the floor with blood all over him.
I asked what's going on, and she said Bob was laying on the floor and he had blood on his face.
And she tries to investigate what's going on. She goes into Bob's office and gets the shock of her life.
I went inside to see if I could help him. And when I walked in, there was plenty of blood. I watched his chest didn't move. I knew as soon as I saw it. I knew he was gone. Let me breathe for a second.
It was St. Charles's first murder of 2007. And right from the start, it was the kind of thing that just isn't supposed to happen here. That's because St. Charles, Missouri is an idyllic bedroom community. It's just over the bridge from St. Louis with a historic downtown and historic values as well. I guess the idea is that you're supposed to shed the stress of the big city as you come across the wide Missouri River and land here. But as we know, money woes, lies and rage and desperation, the grip of fear, they do not stop at the river's edge.
Now we've got a whole team of officers from the St. Charles Police Department. They've converged on the scene of Bob Idman's murder.
There were just, floods and floods of police cars coming in and just total chaos.
Immediately I responded to the area, to the scene. Bob is laying on the floor between the 2 desks. He's laying on his back, and there's a pool of blood around his head.
Bob Idman was shot 3 times. The first shot was superficial. It was a grazing wound to his chin. The second shot was to his neck, shoulder area, which knocked him down.
According to St. Charles homicide detective Don Stepp, the third and fatal shot had been fired through Bob Idman's left eye as the assailant stood over his prone body.
I would definitely classify that third shot as being an execution.
This was an insurance office, and it was a fairly open area. We collected bullet casings, bullets, bullet fragments. We would mark the position, set up little yellow tents called photo markers. We would photograph it. We dusted for fingerprints. You're hoping that maybe you will find one fingerprint that may lead to a particular suspect.
Police are seeking out anyone who might have spotted something that morning in Bob's office. With her office directly below Bob's, Deborah Kennedy didn't see anyone, but she might have heard something.
I think it was probably around 10:30 or 11 o'clock. A friend of mine had come in. You know, I heard a couple noises, and we both kind of looked at each other, and then I heard a big thud on my ceiling. And we're kind of like, what the heck, is Bob doing up there? And so, being the way I am, I yelled up through the rafters, hey, Bob, keep it down. I'm trying to work down here.
We came to the conclusion that those loud bangs that she heard was the gunshots in Bob's office.
Police quickly worked to gather information about the victim. His name is Bob Idman. He's 48 years old. He was married for a very long time, had no children, and worked in the insurance industry.
But just recently, like the past 2 years, had just started this new company. He'd got like a franchise. He just started that on his own.
As news begins to spread that something bad has happened at Bob's office, concerned friends and associates in the insurance business, they rush to the site, like the longtime colleague who asked that we call her Dana. What made you want to go over there?
That's my friend. I wanted to make sure he was okay. I remember locking up my office. I had a client in there, and she saw how distraught I was. And I'm just in the car, just all the way there saying, no, no, Bob.
What happened when you got there?
Of course, they're spectators, so someone said that someone got shot. Didn't see Bob, didn't see him waving in the window, didn't see any sign of him at all. And then when they took his body out of the office, we knew it was Bob's body because he was a big guy.
What's that moment like?
Oh, my goodness. It was the worst.
Local reporters have arrived on the scene as well. Those reporters notice that a woman pulls up, and it turns out that she is the now widow of Robert Idman. Her name is Diane, and Diane approaches the reporters, asking them if they know what's happening. And the reporters are saying that they feel uncomfortable telling her about her husband, so they direct her to the police.
But Diane said that she hadn't heard from Bob all day, which was odd, and she kept trying to call him, and he never answered the office phone. So when she shows up and seen all the police cars, she knew something had happened, and she identified herself.
Diane found out on the site, didn't she, that her husband had been murdered?
Yes, she did.
As investigators comb the area looking for video of any potential suspects, they happen upon this grocery store just a few doors down from Bob Idman's office. Inside, they take note of the security camera that captured the mail carrier earlier that morning. It was right about there, pointed directly towards the front door. Once they get a look at the video it recorded, it's the first big break in the case.
Police believe Idman was working alone when someone walked inside his business, fatally shot him, then took off.
Insurance agent Bob Idman is dead, shot to death in his office along a busy thoroughfare near the interstate in St. Charles, Missouri.
We are west of the city of St. Louis, which most people kind of relate that to the arch.
They are just separated by a river, so just hop on the bridge and you're in St. Charles.
And like this town's famous Christmas tradition celebration and their lively Oktoberfest, murder comes but once a year.
St. Charles averages about 1.5 homicides a year.
It's a pretty peaceful community, and people look out for each other.
A cold-blooded murder is not something St. Charles is known for, and the local cops will probably need some help with what looks like a big investigation. So they appeal to a special group for help.
A request was made to notify the Major Case Squad.
And they contact other departments that are in our area, and they send detectives to assist us.
More than 30 detectives with the Major Case Squad are now looking for his killer.
This elite Major Case Squad has a very high rate of success. 80% of their cases are solved. But with all this manpower, there's one catch. They only have 5 days to get the job done. So the clock is ticking.
They're coming from all other agencies. At some point, they need to get back to theirs.
The police canvassed First Capital right there in front of the shop.
How you doing?
Hi, what's up?
We're with the Major Case Squad, and we're investigating a homicide that happened here Friday afternoon.
Asking, did you notice something on June 7th?
And then you can see in the distance those apartment houses. You talked to all the people who lived in those apartment houses too, didn't you?
Every door was knocked on multiple times until we got contact.
And could one part of Bob Idman's line of work have put him in jeopardy?
Robert Idman's specialty in the insurance company was dealing with high-risk drivers, individuals that could not get insurance through traditional places, people that had prior traffic violations.
He wasn't taking checks because apparently those had been bounced, and this was back in the day when checks were a thing.
But his good friend and insurance colleague Dana, she felt Bob was taking too great a risk with the form of payment he did take.
So he would accept cash against a lot of people who advised him not to take cash.
Though he was known for accepting cash, he doesn't have a safe. Instead, police learned Bob would put the cash he received from clients into a far less secure place.
There was a drawer in Bob's desk that was locked, and you'd have to use a screwdriver to manipulate the lock to be able to open it.
When police managed to open the drawer and they checked the cash box, oh, there's money inside, about $200.
There was no forced entry, but it could have absolutely been a robbery. I know one of the things they were looking for was Bob's wallet missing.
And you're looking for anywhere that somebody might have thrown something, like Bob Idman's wallet.
From the top of the roof, all through the grass, ditches, sewers, everywhere. We could not find the wallet. The wallet's going to be 90% of the time in a man's back pocket.
And to get that wallet out, you would have had to struggle between the wallet and the inside of the pants, which caused some friction. I recommended that we cut the pants pockets out and send them to the crime lab. We just thought maybe a sample of skin cells could be found inside Bob's pocket.
When we touch something or brush up against something, some of our DNA is transferred to the other object. If they're located, those skin cells can be broken down into DNA.
So you were checking for DNA everywhere else, but this was just kind of out of the blue. You just thought, well, you know, we might as well give this a try.
Yes, sir. It was the first time that I'd ever heard of anybody's pants pockets getting cut out.
While one team is feverishly working to gather physical evidence, another team is talking to anyone they can find, talking to family, friends, anything that will help them glean information about Bob Idman.
Bob was a big teddy bear. He was friendly, he was bubbly. He called me wild woman. I think it has something to do with my hair. It grew on me.
Bob was a funny little guy, and I say little meaning that I think he was probably about 5'4", 5'6".
If we were going to say what size personality he had, like small to large, where would you put him on the scale there, Pam?
I'd say extra large.
His persona was just so, hey, you guys see me? I'm here.
How would you describe his relationship to authority growing up?
Not good. He defied authority with regularity. He had to go to summer school every summer. In fact, my parents tried to bribe him and said, hey, if you can graduate from high school in 4 years, we'll give you a car. He's like, show me the car first.
We were in high school together. Bob was pretty forward. He liked to talk to the ladies and hang out and visit. Then he met Diane, and he fell in love with her, and they were real close.
I believe Diane and Bobby made a fantastic couple. I really liked Diane. She She'd put Bobby in his place. Bobby say something smart, she'd say something smart right back at him.
She was taller than him. I don't think it really mattered to him at all.
He ended up getting some lifts, so he felt like he was as tall as his wife.
Bob and Diane had been married for 20 plus years. They did not have any children.
So instead, his office featured photos of the muscle cars that he loved, while under his desk, he kept a copy of the Dreamgirls CD. He finally got to be his own boss, but there were great challenges, weren't there?
Yeah, he started talking like, well, the business isn't doing so good. I haven't had that many people come in.
He kept saying, you know, if I don't make this in the next couple months, I'm not sure.
I might go under.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it.
Think about all that financial stress. At least one person thinks it was taking a terrible toll.
I thought he committed suicide.
You thought he was so despondent that he might have taken his own life.
I did.
Remember that video camera in the grocery store next to Bob's, pointing toward the street in front? Police have been poring over the footage, and now they may have found something of interest. There, that white car.
At 10:50 a.m., you see the vehicle drive past the front doors, and 4 minutes later, you see it drive past the front doors, I believe a little slower, and almost like creeping along looking for something.
Was this driver making sure the coast was clear?
It wasn't the greatest picture, I remember that. It's always frustrating when you can't identify the people inside the vehicle.
One thing we can tell is a white four-door vehicle. Luckily,
I'm impressed you can tell it's a four-door vehicle. It looks like a white car. But it turned out the small St. Charles Police Department had a car maven.
we have an individual at the time that could almost identify almost any type of vehicle. He was a big car guy. He said it was a Ford Focus.
Like, I like cars, but honestly, wow.
We're kind of looking at this several different ways. Is he having problems with a customer with a white Ford Focus?
The bad news is that in St. Charles County, there are 1,300 Ford Focuses. In the state of Missouri, there are 5,000.
5,000 is a big number to have to deal with.
But they're not finding anything suspicious until a gift-wrapped lead suddenly falls into their lap. A white car is crashed and abandoned nearby. And get this about the driver.
He had bloody clothing on. Why has he got Bob's business card? I hope this is it.
A mail carrier found Idman's body shot several times inside his Brook Auto Insurance agency at about 12:30 Friday afternoon.
So in broad daylight, a man is shot dead in his place of business on a busy street. I'm sure it did strike fear.
I don't understand why somebody would kill somebody right here.
It was such a senseless killing that nobody really understood what was going on.
I didn't want to go back to work the next morning. I wanted to get the heck out of Dodge. I wanted to get out of town.
Police here in St. Charles, Missouri still had no motive, no witnesses, and no way to quell the rising fear of the St. Charles community. Fear and anxiety that grew even more after three men broke into a bowling alley, took $700, and tied up the janitor in the process.
Two men wearing masks and carrying guns rob a St. Charles bowling alley.
Well, here is proof they had a gun, a bullet hole left in the office windows. They busted in through the back door, shot up the office, tried to shoot open a safe.
Geographically, it was just down the street from Brooks Insurance.
And it was a bowling alley that we all bowled at, so at first we all thought it was tied together.
So people wondered if there was a connection between the two robberies.
And we looked at that, seeing if they were connected. And in the course of that investigation, we were able to eliminate it from being a part of this case.
Police are knee-deep in Bob Idman's murder investigation, and they come upon a really interesting scene. It's an abandoned, crashed white car. And when they track down the owner, well, there's a couple of really eye-popping pieces of information.
He had bloody clothing on, and he also had one of Robert Idman's business cards. Why does he have bloody clothing? Is it his blood? Is it Bob's blood?
We have some questions we need answered. This could be it.
It blew my mind, like, whoa.
Travis Wade Ensley is about to blow a lot of minds at police headquarters, where leads in Bob Idman's murder have been hard to come by.
The car that I wrecked was a white four-door Saturn.
Which might have looked like the car that was captured on the footage.
The next thing I know, I'm at St. Charles Police Station getting questioned for murder.
Police now feel that he has a lot of explaining to do. So as Travis recalls, his story goes kind of something like this.
I needed new insurance on my car. My buddy's like, check this guy out, and called him up, gave me good rates. And then like a week later, I had been out, had a couple drinks. Okay. I wound up wrecking my car right by my apartment. My airbags deployed and it knocked the sense out of me, and I like staggered down the hill, like right to my apartment, didn't remember nothing.
Okay.
Next day I woke up, I walk out my door, my car's not there.
So Travis calls police to report his car as stolen, but then is stunned to suddenly find himself a potential person of interest in a murder.
I was scared to death.
They were coming at you.
Yeah, they were coming at me pretty good.
Travis has what seems like a likely story about why there's blood on a shirt. He said that when he crashed his car, he got a bloody nose. Cops will check out his story, so they're not quite ready to clear him.
And they went and looked into certain, my alibi and this and that. They're like, okay, yeah, he's not the guy.
Now, police turn their attention closer to home, to Bob Idman's widow, Diane. It is quite routine for police to look at the spouse of someone who's been murdered.
When Bob's wife, Diane, was advised that Bob had been murdered in his office, she didn't have a great reaction.
While Diane does appear to be upset in this photo, some detectives at the scene felt she was not overly emotional.
I don't want to say it didn't seem like a surprise to her, but she wasn't reacting in a manner that I thought a wife would react when he found out her husband was shot.
That struck me, and I'm sure several detectives, as unusual.
Is she in shock? Is she in denial? Is she involved in this?
Then there's Detective Stephanie Kaiser. Already a veteran sex crimes investigator, Kaiser was respected for her sensitivity and understanding with victims.
That would be completely normal in a shock situation like that. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all when you're talking about trauma, because to be able to process that would take some time. They're moving slow. They can't think. So I make nothing of that behavior.
Now Detective Kaiser is about to become the St. Charles Police Department's Diane Whisperer.
Diane Idman became my lead. Right. We were assigned to take her from, sadly, the scene.
Diane wants to go to Bob's parents' home so that she can break the terrible news to them. And during that ride, Diane talks about how she is the manager of the kitchen at the local hospital, and she also offers more information about her beloved husband.
She said that there was financial problems.
When you say financial problems, what do you mean?
I mean, they were having a tough time paying bills. According to Diane, there wasn't much cash coming in. The business itself was struggling.
Detective Kaiser continues talking with Diane, and she makes a note that Diane seems incredibly forgetful. She can't remember her own Social Security number. And then the detective asks her about any existing insurance policies.
She was upfront that, yes, I have a life insurance policy through work.
Diane initially gave us an answer that she thought they had a couple of small policies, approximately $5,000.
Not much, right?
Not much.
So Diane was pretty direct with me. I think she'd had a lot of questions asked of her and then just kind of tells me boldly, I did not do this.
These conversations with Diane will shape and reshape the police investigation into Bob Idman's murder. At the end of that first day, Diane sounds like every other resident of St. Charles. She is terribly afraid.
It's just dawning on her, wait, I'm not safe either. I have to act and get her extra patrol, and I did. But you have to still go where the evidence leads.
And no one knows yet where that evidence will lead, especially in the wake of the very first astonishing story that Diane Idman tells Detective Kaiser, with words that will be ringing in lots of heads at police headquarters.
One of the first things she says is, don't take this as a confession or anything, but this happened to my dad too. Has her father been murdered and her husband murdered as well? Has lightning struck this woman twice?
At the time of his death, Bob Idman had been married to his wife Diane for more than 2 decades. And yet, even those closest to him could find Diane to be something of an enigma to them.
Not very outgoing.
No, not very outgoing. She's just kind of shy and quiet. I mean, she just didn't really have a lot to say to anyone, really.
When you would ask Bob about Diane, what kinds of things would he say about her?
His famous saying was, she's not the person you think she is, and I never knew what that meant.
Now, Detective Kaiser was reeling from the incredible story that Diane had just told her.
She makes this statement, don't take this as a confession, but something like this has happened before. And I'm not quoting Diane at this point, but somebody broke into the house and shot my dad. So when I asked, did they catch the person?
How did she answer that question?
She said, they thought my mom shot my dad.
And we're wondering if lightning had struck twice in the same place.
Diane Bowling Idman, seen here on her wedding day in 1978 with her father Jerome, was just 26 years old when he was murdered inside the home he shared with his wife Lenore, Diane's mother. The murder case that made headlines in this region all began when a call came through in the wee hours on the morning of April 6, 1984. Gordon Adams was an officer with the St. Louis County PD.
What went out over the radio when you heard the call?
As I recall, like I say, it came out as a home invasion with someone shot. And so that's what we would consider a hot call. Well, when I arrived, it's 2:30 in the morning, maybe 2:35. So it's dark as can be. I immediately went to the door, knocked on the door, and Lenore answered. And the hair is pristine, and she's standing there in a kind of sheer nightgown. And she says, my husband needs help. He's in the bedroom. He's been shot.
What are you thinking when you're hearing this story for the first time?
I mean, she didn't strike you as a woman who woke up in the middle of the night to find her husband murdered. No tears. The hair was all done. And I'm trying to get information for my report. And she actually lit up a cigarette. I'm thinking, this is your husband. He's just been murdered. She didn't have any emotion at all, almost.
David Barron was a detective with the St. Louis County Police assigned to the case.
So Lenore Bowling was asserting that an intruder had come into the house, somehow found her husband's service revolver, used that service revolver to kill him, and then left.
That's what she was saying.
How did that strike you as a plausible story, given your years of experience in law enforcement?
It was an improbable set of circumstances. And to throw into that, the garage door was open about a foot.
Okay, that garage door over there was open a foot.
And the inside garage door, leading it from the garage into the house, is the only door in the house that did not have a deadbolt.
Diane's mother had told police she believed she was being stalked in the days prior to the shooting by a black male driving a black car who'd been leaving notes at their home. And there was a note found at the crime scene.
Well, the last note that was found at the scene said, "This is for you, pig, for what you did to me." No, I made a canvass later on in the neighborhood. No one saw a black male in a black car dressed in all black.
Lenore Bowling was charged with the murder of her husband. She pled not guilty, and while she was awaiting trial, she moved in with Bob and Diane.
How did Bob feel about living with someone who was accused of shooting her husband to death?
Bob was not happy about that.
He was scared.
Yeah,
He would
was
go to bed
very-
every
he was very
night, or him
scared.
say would bolt his door, lock it closed. He did not. He was afraid. He didn't want to be in the house with her.
After that fateful night, this saga ending here in the fall of 1985. Diane Idman's mother, Lenore Bowling, on trial for capital murder in the death of her husband, Diane's father, Jerome Bowling. Lenore Bowling found not guilty of her husband's murder.
They did not believe that she did it. They believed her story.
The irony not lost on investigators, as Diane Idman, more than 20 years later, now a person of interest
in a different killing.
Has her father been murdered and her husband murdered as well? What a weird set of circumstances.
But it was something else Diane Idman told investigators about her own husband that they said gave them pause.
During Diane's initial interview, she was asked if there was any insurance policies. Diane said that she thought there was one policy, and she thought it was just a small policy, approximately $5,000.
She describes that she has a life insurance policy through work. She's not sure about the details on that.
I was contacted by an insurance company and told that there was additional policies for Robert Idman that we were not made aware of that were quite substantial in size.
Now with Bob's death, police say she was suddenly in line to receive more than $300,000 in life insurance.
We did not know if Diane had forgotten to tell us about those policies. Did Diane know about those policies?
And as they start looking deeper into Bob Idman, they make a mind-blowing discovery. This man was leading a double life.
And then the commander of the major case squad asked me a question that just kind of floored me. I had no idea.
I went to Bob's funeral, and it was sad to see him there. I didn't expect to go see my friend in a casket, and I felt horrible for his wife and his family.
Bob's older brother by 21 months. Glenn Idman grew up as a straight-A student, and he was a frequent target of Bob's verbal barbs. How did he feel about you being a policeman?
He made fun of me a lot. He did not like that. Wasn't big on police. He got in trouble growing up.
Glenn always believed that Bob was his mother's favorite. Even so, he said he was not prepared for what he says she asked him to do as they attended Bob's funeral.
At his funeral, my mom, she was confined to a wheelchair. She was in very poor health. So she goes, "How could somebody do this to my boy?" I said, "Mom, I don't know. I don't know why." She goes, "Well, I want you to find those people. I want you to kill them." And I said, "That's not how this works. You know, I'm a police officer. I can't do something like that." But she was very devastated, and literally 3 months after his death, she died.
She just lost her will to live.
It was kind of a rough year, for sure.
I went up to the funeral and seen Diane as she was broken up, but I didn't ask a lot of questions.
She never really said a whole lot. She really didn't say a lot about anything. She was pretty quiet.
I was just watching Diane and just grieving with her. And I noticed there was a large police presence. And I just thought that was odd for a funeral. But if they suspect the murderers to be there, then they were there for a reason.
At the time of Robert Idman's funeral, we set up surveillance and we recorded video of the attendees at the funeral, as well as obtaining the guest book. for the services.
Police check out every name on the funeral registry. It takes them nowhere. Meanwhile, it's day 4 of the Major Crimes Task Force investigation. The clock is ticking, but still no good leads on who killed Bob Idman.
We were striking out. There was no one that could really come up and say, Bob's having a problem with anyone.
But then the Major Case Squad does a deep dive into Bob's email, his phone, and computer records. They're searching for any hidden clues. They make a discovery they're eager to know a lot more about, just as Glenn comes in for his interview.
You know, they put me in an interview room to ask me some questions. I said, you know, I have nothing to hide. You don't have to play these games. You know, ask me whatever you want. And he asked me a question that just kind of floored me. He said, we're trying to find out about your brother's alternative lifestyle. I said, what alternative? He goes, his affairs. You know, I go, you think he's out picking up women? I mean, he, you know, that just ain't happening. And he's like, your brother was gay. I had no idea.
We had no idea.
We did not know that.
Turns out this long-married insurance agent was leading a secret double life.
While we were analyzing Bob's computers and it was discovered that he was visiting male-on-male websites were sexual in nature, and he was making contact with some of these places. Sometimes in these murder investigations, as we dig into them, you find a lot about a person's life, their lifestyle.
When you have a secret, what vulnerability does that give someone like Bob Idman?
Anytime somebody has a secret and somebody knows it, and you're keeping it a secret for a reason, people can use that as leverage to get their way if they want to blackmail you or extort you.
As investigators continue searching through Bob's phone records, they find something else noteworthy. One phone number keeps popping up, belonging to a man from out of town.
They had an intimate relationship. They would rent a hotel room somewhere and visit each other. Automatically, a flag gets raised.
What is it like to all of a sudden learn that there's this whole other secret part of his life that you knew nothing about?
It was upsetting. I guess I felt he should have been able to talk to somebody about that. He shouldn't have had to hide that life. He shouldn't have had to lie. Having a relationship and being gay that's just part of life. And I wish he would have been able to share that with us. Yeah.
How you doing?
Police bring in this secret lover for questioning. They can't help but wonder, would this man have a reason to murder Bob? And what about Diane? Could his existence have set her into a murderous rage?
We've altered the man's voice.
People are going to find out some stuff they're probably not going to like.
Feelings can run wild with someone. If I can't have you, nobody's going to have you. It gives people motive.
And as a young, untested detective is taking on his very first big murder case, a totally unexpected assist from the cutting edge of forensic science, it's going to take this investigation into surprising territory and bring answers at last to the key question. Why was Bob Idman killed?
It blew my mind when the results came back. It was the golden ticket. This is what we were looking for.
Two blocks behind me, Bob Idman was found robbed and murdered. Diane found out on the site that her husband had been murdered.
Yes, she did.
She makes this statement, something like this has happened before. Somebody broke into the house and shot my dad.
It absolutely crossed everybody's mind that this was kind of a copycat murder.
I've told her, hey, your husband's been killed. Your marriage is about to be put under a spotlight.
We discovered that Bob was having an affair.
She had found out that he was having an affair with another man, and that she was very angry about that.
They'd had an argument about that.
Diane was asking, are you telling me my husband's gay?
This is one of those bizarre cases where all the evidence seems to be pointing in one direction, then suddenly the rug is pulled out from under you, stunning everyone.
I was very shocked. We cut open the pocket, swabbed the edges, hoping to get possible DNA. And the next day, state gave me the name.
I was sitting in the same room with the person that shot and killed my brother.
Friends and family are mourning the loss of Bob Idman, gunned down in his office in a small strip mall in St. Charles, Missouri.
A man that loved life, always wanted to have fun, always wanted to enjoy himself. He had a great personality, very funny, very intelligent.
He seemed like a nice guy, but after you got to know him a bit, that's when the Bobby came out. He was extremely comical. He'd make me laugh so hard. It would hurt.
He liked to have fun. He loved muscle cars. And as far as in the office, you heard him. He was a loud guy. He was one of those guys that when he got on the phone, you kind of put your earplugs in because he was pretty loud. Larger than life, he was.
I could depend on him when I was not in a great place. He would talk and he made sense.
Now Bob Idman was dead, and nothing made sense. It was a little before 11 a.m. on June 8th when a mail carrier discovered Bob's lifeless body on the floor of his office.
Stop, please, stop. There's a man. I'm delivering the mail right now. He's lying on the floor with blood all over him.
Bob Idman was shot 3 times.
There was no forced entry or anything. He was a business that was open for business, but it could have absolutely been a robbery.
Robert Idman's specialty in the insurance company was dealing with high-risk drivers, individuals that could not get insurance through traditional places.
So he would accept cash against a lot of people who didn't take cash and advised them not to take cash.
This is a huge murder case in a very small town. And with more questions than answers, St. Charles PD needs help, and boy, do they get it. Enter the elite major case squad.
20 to 30 detectives will respond, and the only thing they will work on for the next 5 days is that situation they've been called out on.
The investigation into Bob Idman's murder is all hands on deck.
One of the things that we were not able to recover or locate was Robert Idman's wallet.
Bob's wife, Diane, said he always carried his wallet in his back pocket. Police are desperate for leads, so they're going to try something unconventional. They cut the back pockets out of Idman's pants to send for something they call touch DNA testing.
We just thought maybe a sample of skin cells could be found inside Bob's pocket.
It's a newer technology, and it's a long shot. Police, meanwhile, canvassed the neighborhood where the crime occurred. They're knocking on doors. They're looking for every clue they can find.
During the area canvas, there's a Mexican grocery store. It's just a couple of doors down. I think it was on the end of this particular strip mall, and they were able to locate some surveillance video.
A white car passing by twice, but the video is grainy.
In that video footage, we saw a Ford Focus. We were not able to get a license plate due to the angle of the camera, and we were not able to see who was in the vehicle.
With lead after lead coming up empty and the clock ticking on that major case squad, Diane Idman. She remains the subject of, well, we'll call it curiosity. She was, after all, the person closest to Bob.
It is quite routine for police to look at the spouse of someone who's been murdered.
Tough questions need to be asked about the state of the Idman's marriage.
I took that a step further. Has there been any time that you two argued? Has there been any time that you were unfaithful to him or he was unfaithful to you?
Diane insisted the marriage was fine. But when investigators seize Bob's computers to be analyzed, they make a shocking discovery.
Bob's been visiting gay websites online. He's looking for massages and sexual relations.
Bob Idman had been leading a secret life, and a search of phone records reveals so much more.
We found several calls that were coming in and coming out pretty much the same time each day. We discovered that Bob was having an affair.
A secret relationship with a man who lived more than 3 hours away. Police take a drive to interview him.
He was very forthcoming in the fact that the relationship between him and Bob was an intimate relationship, but very much affectionate and loving. They'd hoped to be together at some point.
It wasn't like a quick fling, kind of out the door kind of thing. I think that's what it was going to be. We just became good friends and just kept talking from then on.
He says he never visited Bob in St. Charles, but said the two spoke every day and that he loved Bob. The two would stay in motels closer to his hometown when they got together. During the interview with investigators, he rolled up his right sleeve to reveal a tattoo that he said was for Bob.
While doing the search of his home, we located a box the size of a shoebox, and it had cards from Bob. It had receipts from when they'd go to dinner or go to a hotel. He was saving it.
With such tender and strong feelings for Bob, a handful of scenarios leaped to the mind of law enforcement. Could it have been a jilted lover who murdered Bob Idman?
Feelings can run wild with someone. If I can't have you, nobody's going to have you. It gives people motive.
In theory, a jilted lover made potential sense to investigators, but the man had an alibi. On the date of the murder, he was at work, hours away from St. Charles.
He was on video, and there were numerous people who said, yes, he was here this day. This is the time he clocked in.
After passing a polygraph, Bob's secret lover is cleared. But it's something he tells investigators about Diane that raises red flags.
He called me. He goes, I got some bad news. I said, what? He said, she read one of my emails. He said that Friday night, he said it was a pretty bad night.
Investigators are now zeroing in on Diane. How angry was she when she discovered Bob's secret life? Angry enough to commit murder?
You never met her before?
No. I've seen her picture.
Would she be angry enough to go in and do that?
I hope not.
Days after Bob Idman is murdered in his office, police discover the long-married insurance agent had a secret male lover, a man whom he met up with for motel room trysts and who he spoke to every day, a man who was devoted to Bob.
Did you guys love each other, or was it just a very close personal relationship?
I loved it, but I never said it to him.
The secret lover is alibied out for Bob's killing, but in a frank session with police, he says Bob told him that Diane had discovered their relationship, and he says that Bob had told him Diane's reaction had led to a full-blown argument between the two.
He said that, she said, who's, and, so this is, I think he said this is just, a fantasy deal or what have you. It's what Bob said. She asked him if we were sleeping together, and he said no. He said it was pretty rough that night, that Friday night.
It was up to Detective Stephanie Kaiser, the Diane Whisperer, to broach the delicate subject with Bob's widow while interviewing her at the Idman's home. Kaiser said Diane told her that she'd learned of her husband's relationship with the man after discovering an email between the two, that Bob denied having an affair, but it was the tone of that email which had deeply hurt her feelings.
She describes it as he's telling him intimate things that he hasn't told me. She's telling me I felt hurt because he wasn't speaking to me that way. So they're married.
What do you think she meant when she said that? What kinds of things were they saying to each other?
I didn't ask the specifics, but I'm just talking to her about it. Did this happen? Could this be a motive?
In Detective Kaiser's account, Diane seemed to be struggling a little bit with the nature of her husband's relationship to the man. or what they did during their time together.
When I'm interviewing Diane, one of the things I asked a lot of different things, to the point where Diane was asking me questions like, are you telling me my husband's gay? I asked her, what did Bob tell you? What are your impressions? Her response back was, he told me no. He was going there to meet with him. They worked together, and he needed the stress relief.
Kaiser said Diane told her that when she learned of the relationship after discovering that email, she and Bob discussed it, but they never argued.
I'm telling Diane, Detective Stepp and Detective Grove are talking to him now. He's saying you guys had a loud, angry argument. She said, I don't know that it was loud and angry. Well, that's what he's saying. You know, Diane, what say you? She said, I told him it was over. I told him he was going to end that friendship. But she said, I don't know if I was yelling and screaming. I go, that's what he's saying. I'm just asking. So.
But she laid her foot down. She gave him an
Yes.
ultimatum. You are not to see this guy anymore.
Yes.
As far as you know, did Bob adhere to that ultimatum?
No, he did not.
Diane Idman finds herself sitting in a polygraph room at the St. Charles Police Department.
So Diane was pretty direct with me. I think she'd had a lot of questions asked of her and then just kind of tells me boldly, I did not do this. I didn't. Diane is just direct.
Diane Idman voluntarily submitted to a polygraph, and the results came back being inconclusive.
She doesn't pass, but it's inconclusive. So it's just still kind of puts her in that iffy category, if you will.
Adding to investigators' frustration, a day after Diane takes that polygraph test, the clock expires. The major case squad is out of there. 37 officers, 15 different departments had spent more than 2,500 man-hours investigating, with no arrests. A frustrating end to a furious search for answers.
When it goes back to our police department at the time, it is frustrating knowing that you didn't solve this case and it just goes on to an active case file to be looked at as further investigative leads come in.
At that point, I'm assigned the investigation.
The task of solving the murder of Bob Idman now falls to a junior detective in the department, Don Stepp.
When my sergeant came up and asked if I would like to be assigned this investigation, I was overwhelmed. It's one of those things, am I ready to do this? You don't want to say no, it's an opportunity. I wanted to see this investigation to the end.
Don had contacted me and said, I'm starting from scratch. I'm going to take this entire investigation. I'm going to do everything over again.
What did that feel like to hear?
Well, it was refreshing to, I just felt like there wasn't a lot there.
In 2007, I had only been a detective for 4 years. I was the young guy in the squad.
I had got promoted and I was a police chief at the time, and I didn't want him to feel like there was pressure on him. But he met with me a couple times, and the one time that really struck home is he said, hey, you're like family, and I am going to solve this.
What motivates me to keep going on this investigation is there's someone or someones who had killed Bob Idman. Bob Idman needs someone to stand in his corner.
Detective Stepp continues to immerse himself in the details of the case. It had been over a year since Bob Idman was murdered, when Stepp is at the airport in St. Louis and he spots Diane.
I was off duty, and then I was picking up a family member at the airport, and Diane was walking my direction.
Despite the time that had passed, Diane had never fallen off of Stepp's radar. Diane Idman knows that you're keeping a close eye on her, doesn't she?
Yes, sir, she does.
How would you characterize the look on her face when she saw you?
Shock. I believe at that point she thought she was going to be arrested.
But the surprise of a chance encounter pales in comparison to the shock investigators get when they receive a call from the crime lab. Remember that pocket police cut out of Bob Idman's pants to send for DNA analysis?
It blew my mind when the results came back. It was the golden ticket. This is what we were looking for.
It is 2009. Diane Idman is spotted at the airport in St. Louis by Detective Don Stepp.
How would you characterize the look on her face when she saw you?
Shock.
Stepp documents the incident, later learns that Diane took a trip to Las Vegas.
But nothing comes of it.
And if you don't have a suspect right away, then there's things that take time. So things slowed down, but things did not stop.
Face it, there are few, if any, solid leads to pursue, including the identity of that mystery driver whose car was seen on the day of the murder.
They had this famous lead about this car that went around the block, and they had it on video, but there were 22 detectives for 5 days, and they didn't find it.
And there's another lingering piece of evidence still out there. That touch DNA taken from Idman's back pocket. It was sent to the St. Louis Major Crimes Lab.
Anytime you submitted any kind of DNA information, DNA samples, it was going to be a year or more before you got an answer to it.
Nearly 2 agonizing years after Bob's murder, it's as if this case is frozen in time.
I felt that they were never going to solve the case. I mean, we pray every day. Just, we need peace. We need answers. We need to find out what happened.
It seemed like there were no answers.
No.
Then in March of 2009, that touch DNA from Bob's pocket is forwarded to Brian Crime.
He's a forensic scientist with the St. Charles County Police Department.
We were contacted by investigators and asked if we could do the DNA on the case.
With almost every angle of the case having been explored and explored again, it all comes down to what 𝐅𝐔 could uncover with the DNA analysis.
If we were going to swab the back pocket of a pair of pants, we would cut open the pocket, swab the edges, hoping to get possible DNA. Once I get a swab, I process it and cut the tip off and put it in an extraction tube, and then we load it onto a genetic analyzer that ultimately produces a DNA profile.
But given the cold case backlog, it takes several more months for the DNA to be processed. And when the results come back, investigators get a major break that heats up this cold case.
I developed an unknown male profile. It was a mixture of 2 people. One of those persons was the victim, Robert Idman, and the other one was an unknown male.
I knew once we obtained the DNA profile, the identity of the individual in Bob Idman's pocket, I knew that was the golden ticket. I knew that was when we were going to be able to close this case.
That unknown DNA could lead investigators to Bob's killer, so 𝐅𝐔 enters the profile into CODIS.
That's a law enforcement database. Hours later, there's a hit.
It hit that same day, and the next day, state gave me the name.
The DNA doesn't match Bob's wife or his secret lover or anyone else the police had been looking into. Instead, it comes back to someone who was never on the investigators' radar.
What did you learn that person's name was?
Paul White.
When the name's first discovered, Detective Stepp is otherwise engaged.
I was on a traffic detail directing traffic.
Did you just want to run up and down the street and tell people we've got our guy?
I was very shocked. My mind was not on directing traffic at that time.
What did you do then?
I started researching Paul White.
Turns out Paul White was no stranger to law enforcement,
having served 15 years in prison for robbery.
When they got the DNA match, Don had contacted me and said, I'm going to solve this. And I truly believed him. I got to give him a lot of credit. You know, he did a lot of old-fashioned work.
This new lead poses even more questions for investigators. Could Diane have hired Paul White to kill Bob, or had White acted alone? When the DNA came in, that didn't seem to exclude her either. The idea being maybe she had hired somebody.
Yes, I mean, it was worked all the way through.
You now have Paul White's DNA on Robert Idman's pocket at the time of his murder, right?
Yes, sir.
So I assume you want to talk to Paul White.
Yes, sir, I do.
And Paul White was not hard to find.
Paul White was incarcerated at the time when the DNA came back.
How you doing?
And so in September 2010, Detective Stepp pays a visit to Paul White at a maximum security prison in Fulton, Missouri, where he's serving time for forgery.
Do you have any idea why we're here? I wanted him to know right off the bat that we knew he was there. Does this guy look familiar? Never seen him before. I wanted the truth. I wanted to get a confession from Paul. I've got your DNA in his back pocket.
And will that touch DNA evidence be enough to get that confession?
White leaned back in his chair. He laughed.
It's impossible.
It's not.
It's impossible. It's no way in the world. It's impossible.
What are you thinking when he does that?
I'm thinking this is going to be a long interview.
I'm getting taped and stuff, and I'm what the man.
Amen.
Investigators quickly clear Sherry White as a suspect in Bob Idman's murder. With the trail of evidence now leading directly to Paul White, Detective Stepp decides it's time to meet face to face.
This is where the magic happens.
Doesn't look all that magical, does it?
No, it doesn't.
What happens to people when they come into a room like this?
We get to the bottom of facts. This is where people have an opportunity to tell us about what they've done and tell us their story.
Since Paul White is already serving a prison sentence for an unrelated forgery charge, he's literally a captive audience. Let's go back and talk about some of your strategy as you were going to talk to Paul White.
Paul, I believe, was in a little bit of shock after all these years. Two detectives showing up from St. Charles City. He did not expect that to happen that day. Do you have any idea why we're here? Okay.
Are you thinking the long game at this point, or do you think he's going to start telling you stuff that he knows at that first interview?
I'm thinking to myself, the DNA itself is probably enough to get an arrest warrant, but I didn't want just an arrest warrant. I wanted the truth. Before I ask any questions, you must understand your rights. You don't have to make a statement or answer questions. You have the right to remain silent. Do you understand that? Could you put your initials there, Paul, for me? I think initially Paul White's attitude was very kicked back, relaxed. First of all, do you know a guy named Robert Idman? Never heard of that guy? I even put a picture down in front of him and asked him, do you know this individual? Does this guy look familiar? Never seen him before. Eventually he came back around and said, yeah, I thought that was his wife's insurance man. That picture I showed you, that's Robert Idman. Okay. You said kind of looks familiar?
Yeah. That's the guy we got the insurance from.
And I explained that we were working a homicide investigation, and I explained that his DNA was located in his back pocket. Do you think there's any chance that your DNA is going to pop up inside that crime scene?
From the robbery.
From the robbery? None? You come to prison, they take your DNA. Your DNA pops up. You know where it pops up? Swabbing in the back pocket of my victim. Your DNA shows up in this guy's back pocket.
That ain't no way in the world.
Why don't you think that?
You said that he got robbed. I never robbed the guy. I've been in there one time and to get insurance. So that's
exactly.
Ain't no way in the world.
You're telling me you've been in there one time.
Yeah.
And your DNA shows up in this guy's back pocket a month later?
That don't need to make sense.
Exactly. With your story, it doesn't make sense.
Again and again during that first interrogation, you tell him, I've got your DNA. I mean, you must have told him, what, 10 or 15 times in the course of that conversation, right?
At least 10 or 15 times. He kept saying, there is no way. Repeatedly. He did not believe it.
It's impossible. It's no way in the world. It's impossible.
Paul, it's not possible.
Okay.
Well, I'm telling you.
I know it's impossible. It's no way in the world.
Then how to get there?
I don't even feel like it was there. It's impossible for it to be there.
After White's adamant and repeated denials about that DNA evidence against him, investigators uncover another critical piece of evidence.
I ran every kind of data history check on him. The big point with Paul White was I found out that a neighboring law enforcement agency had issued a ticket to Paul White after our homicide in a white Ford Focus.
That's right, a white Ford Focus. And remember, that's the very same vehicle make caught on a surveillance camera the day Bob Idman was murdered.
Paul White was a passenger in that vehicle, and the driver was identified via tickets as 𝐄𝐏𝐒𝐋.
Why was the car stopped in the first place?
Registration on the vehicle.
The registration on the vehicle was out of date?
That's correct.
Who was the driver of the car?
The driver of the vehicle was 𝐄𝐏𝐋.
What was significant about that?
We later learned that 𝐄𝐏𝐋 was living with Paul White, and his girlfriend was best friends with Paul White's wife.
So they had a long-standing relationship?
Yes, sir.
What was the indication that you had that 𝐄𝐏𝐋 might have been involved in the murder of Robert Idman?
It was 𝐄𝐏𝐋's vehicle.
You were sure of that?
I was sure of that. I had a couple other officers contact 𝐄𝐏𝐋, and they arrested 𝐄𝐏𝐋 and brought him to the St. Charles City Police Department.
Does 𝐄𝐏𝐋 know a secret that could solve Bob Idman's murder?
You know a man died, right? You know that? Somebody pulled that trigger.
After several years of lead after lead turning cold, the investigation into Bob Idman's murder is now heating up as lead detective Don Stepp zeroes in on a new suspect, a man named 𝐄𝐏𝐋.
I was going to take the same approach with 𝐄𝐏𝐋 as I did with Paul White. Are you the hardened criminal, or are you a guy that made a mistake?
Let's talk about the robbery. I know all about it.
I told him we had a positive idea of his vehicle. We had a positive idea of a Focus, a white four-door Focus.
You know your vehicle's on video? Do you know that? You know that Mexican grocery store? There's a video camera inside. So I seen you pull in. Now, you didn't just pull around once, did you? No, like twice. You pulled around twice. Yeah. And that's on camera. Yeah. Then you pulled up.
He knew he owned a white four-door Focus. He knew he was involved in this. There was no way that he could fight that.
Unlike Paul White, Hines immediately starts talking, saying White approached him the day of the murder.
He got a gun in his hand. Okay. He wakes me up out of my sleep, into my head.
He told you you're going to do a robbery?
I basically already knew that because of the gun.
Okay.
And how he was acting. I mean, he didn't have no money.
It took a very short time, and Cleo just started talking and talking and talking.
What kind of handgun do you think it was?
It looked kind of like a 9mm Glock.
A 9mm Glock, the same type of handgun investigators determined was used to murder Bob Idman. But the question is, who pulled the trigger?
Somebody pulled that trigger. Yeah. Okay.
It wasn't me, it was him.
Okay.
And Cleo wanted to give his side of the story to defend himself against whatever Paul might say he did.
I take him to the drop him. I'm outside. He goes and 5 minutes later he comes back out.
He had gloves on?
Paul. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He has a white gloves. White gloves. They were like cotton, like gloves.
Paul White had been wearing gloves, so Paul White absolutely wasn't going to say anything because he believed his DNA couldn't have been located because he was wearing gloves.
I don't even feel like it was there. It's impossible for it to be there.
So if a perpetrator was wearing a cotton glove when they go into the pocket and digging around, they could leave that DNA that's already on the exterior inside the pocket. Also, if the individual is sweating, it could actually soak through the glove and leave DNA behind that way.
What do you do with those gloves after shooting? In the barbecue pit? Yeah.
Armed with 𝐄𝐏𝐋's confession, Stepp hits the road to Fulton Prison once more for another crack at Paul White.
And I'm going to tell you right up now, I got a full confession from 𝐄𝐏𝐋. Okay, he told me everything.
But even after Detective Stepp reveals 𝐄𝐏𝐋 has accused Paul White of being the gunman, Paul White doesn't blink.
If you got Cleo saying that I did this and that. He's evidently lying to you. And I don't know why he would even say that. I would put a gun to his head and force him to do something.
It's hard to do an interview to get a confession from somebody for a murder. It's really hard to get a confession from somebody for a murder inside prison.
White is arrested the next day, and he's charged with robbery and murder, and could be facing life in prison. Now, with the pressure turned up so high, will he finally change his story?
I've asked you 3 times. Drove 87 miles one way to ask you these questions.
Hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically. Hypothetically.
If I say I was there, you know what I mean, and I saw everything that happened, you know what I mean, and it's like, that just makes me as guilty. You know, I still get a murder charge, but I didn't kill him. I didn't pull the trigger.
Finally, the dam breaks. Paul White starts talking.
I said, I think he got some cash in there, you know what I mean? So I said, we can just, you can go in and rob him, but I said, he probably know who I am, so we're gonna have to get some match. We already had those gloves, those cotton gloves that you were talking about, and then we went up to Walmart, and they had those little type ski masks.
Paul White describes a chilling scene of a panicked Bob Idman trying to comply with his assailant's demands for money with that notoriously sticky desk drawer, you know, where Bob kept his money, instead of in a safe.
And then he started shaking him, like, to his drawer and couldn't get the drawer open. And I was like, man, just give me your wallet. Because I reached in his pocket and grabbed the wallet. And Cleo was like, man, no, there's more money there.
There was a lot of finger pointing at each other, trying to point the blame to someone else.
Cleo Hines told police he never even got out of the car at Bob Idman's office. But Paul White wants police to believe that it was always Hines who had fired the bullets that killed Bob Idman.
We shot him once. He was like, man, where the rest of the money? Where the rest of the money? And he was like, man, there is no other money. There is no other money. And he shot him again. I'm like, man, what the you doing? I said, man, is he dead? He was like, I don't know. Shot him again. So I'm like, man, we got to get rid of this gun. You know what I'm saying? I took it and threw it off the bridge.
Paul White offers to help find the murder weapon, riding along in handcuffs in the back seat of a squad car.
We took Paul White out of St. Charles County Jail.
Going to find the weapon.
And had him point out the area where he got rid of the gun.
I would say, like, right in here.
We searched an extensive area for the gun, was never able to locate it.
Now we have 2 suspects and 2 confessions. And with both men pointing the finger at each other, prosecutors are gearing up to put both of them on trial.
I was sitting in the same room with the person that shot and killed my brother, and that was pretty hard to be calm.
Will Bob Idman's family finally learn who murdered him? At the climax of a more than 3-year investigation that at one point involved 37 officers, cops finally learned the details of what was stolen the day of Bob Idman's murder.
How much money was in the wallet?
It wasn't nothing but like $300.
So, how much you
like
get?
$150 a piece.
$150 a piece.
Paul White and Cleo both advised they went to the casino after the homicide and lost the $300 almost immediately.
He went to the casino because that's what he paid a lot. He lost the money. Yeah, basically did nothing. Right.
It's hard to think about a man's life being taken for $300.
He didn't deserve what he got. He was running a business, trying to make a living, and somebody felt that what he had, they needed too. And so they took it from him. They could have taken his money and left. They didn't have to kill him.
As far as any connection between the 2 men accused of killing Bob Idman and Bob's widow, Diane, Paul White revealed to investigators that he didn't even know who she was.
Do you know a woman named Diane?
No.
You don't know a woman named Diane Idman?
No.
With Paul White and Cleo Hines now both charged with Bob Idman's murder, it now falls to Detective Stepp to break the news to Diane Idman, who had long been in his crosshairs.
I met Diane at her place of employment, and I said, Diane, this is over. We have the individuals, and we have the charges on them for killing your husband.
Was she angry at you?
I don't believe she was angry at me. There was a lot of stress that just came off Diane. You could almost see it leaving her body as she was shaking and crying. She was very happy that this was over.
Here, some 5 years after Bob Idman's murder, Paul White and Cleo Hines are set to stand trial in this courthouse. 2 trials, 2 defendants, with 2 totally different accounts of the crime.
First up at trial, Paul White, who pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder and first-degree robbery.
Really didn't know what to think when I came into trial because I was sitting in the same room with the person that shot and killed my brother. And that was pretty hard.
The trial for Paul White lasted 3 days, which is actually very short for a murder trial in this county.
The trial was swift, and so were the deliberations. The jury needed just 2.5 hours before delivering a verdict. Paul White, guilty of murder and robbery in the first degree.
As for Cleo Hines, he decided not to put his fate in the hands of a jury. Before his trial, he entered what's known as an Alford plea.
An Alford plea is a plea in the state of Missouri where an individual will not say, I did it, but there's enough evidence to say I did it.
With that plea, Hines is convicted of a lesser crime than White, second-degree murder and first-degree robbery. He received 2 life terms, but while Hines' sentence offers the possibility of parole, Paul White will never again see the light of day outside a prison.
Paul White was sentenced to life without parole in the Missouri Department of Corrections.
The investigation into Bob Idman's murder had cast a shadow of suspicion on his widow, Diane. Now she stood in court and gave her own account of all she had lost. Were you there for Diane's victim impact statement?
Yes, we were. She said, I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. You took my best friend. You took my husband away from me.
She told the court this in part. I looked over my shoulder for 5 years afraid, never knowing if the people who killed Bob were coming after me, or did the police really believe that I killed my husband?
I do feel like the system worked. The killers were caught. Science prevailed and overwhelmingly provided evidence that got them a conviction. Never again can he come to a Christmas dinner. Never again can we see him for a birthday party. Never again can he and my son talk and have a conversation or a relationship.
He just loved life. I mean, he was always happy and making jokes, making light of things all the time. We talk about him all the time. It's not like he's gone. He's still here with us.
Both Paul White and Cleo Hines have tried appealing their convictions, but both were denied.
White's life sentence carries no possibility of parole. Hines' first opportunity at parole will be in March of 2034. That's our program for tonight. Thanks so much for watching. I'm David Muir.
And I'm Deborah Roberts. From all of us here at 2020 and ABC News, good night.
Today's March on Washington.
Hope is our revolution, and justice is our righteous inheritance.
We are the dream, but we must turn that dream into demands.
demands for real justice.
Speaking out online.
These protests and this march are what democracy looks like.
And on the streets. In the wake of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and so many others.
He was not treated like a human that day.
A new march is taking place. A new call for accountability and change.
I have been watching police murder people that look like me for years.
Black Lives Matter!
I don't want your pity. I want change.
From political leaders, activists, and protesters.
They brutalized us, shot us with rubber bullets, beat us with batons.
Still trying to make the dream of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. come true.
Mr. President, the people are restless.
See why this documentary is more important than ever. 57 years after the first march in 1963.
Brother John Lewis. I said, this is it. And I went for it.
The March on Washington.
Hello, I'm Deborah Roberts. Those images from today, an echo of something 57 years ago, when 250,000 people first descended on the nation's capital, protesting for jobs and freedom. On today's anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, we at 2020 are proud to present The March, a documentary directed by John Akomfrah and narrated by Denzel Washington. Originally made in 2013 to commemorate the march's 50th anniversary, some of those voices, sadly, are now gone, but their legacy lives on.
I have had to tell my children about segregation and what it means. My 7-year-old daughter, she wanted to go to Funtown, and we found it necessary to explain to her that she couldn't go to Funtown because she was colored. To attempt to explain a system like the unjust and evil system of segregation to a 6-year-old child is a very difficult thing.
In 1963, the movement for civil rights came to the most segregated city in the American South, Birmingham, Alabama.
Birmingham is a symbol of hardcore resistance to integration. It is the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. It has had more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches than any city in the United States.
It's not like any other southern city, okay? Birmingham is Bombingham. They have quarries, and in conducting the quarry business, you use dynamite. So there are a lot of local people who are expert in the use of dynamite.
A teenage boy riding a bicycle had been knocked off the bike and castrated. A young couple had gone to the city hall to get a wedding license, came around the corner and brushed shoulders with a Birmingham policeman, and he pulled out his pistol and pistol whipped the boy to the ground. I mean, it was a horrible, heinous place.
The campaign was to be led by the organization's then 34-year-old leader, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
It is immoral to urge people to accept injustices, oppression, and second-class citizenship in an attempt to wait until the so-called opportune time. The time is always ripe to do right.
Dr. King was the voice of civil rights from the bus boycott on, but by the end of 1962, he recognized that the civil rights movement was losing what he called its window in history. The South was still segregated, and he said, we need to take more of a risk. We need to go for broke. I need to go for broke.
I think he felt that we have to be willing to give our lives to put an end to segregation. If we do, then segregation will end even if we die. And that was the reason he chose Birmingham.
Before the victory is won, some may even have to face physical death. We must come to see that there are some things so eternally true that they are worth dying for, and if a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live.
In January of 1963, one man was determined to stop King's desegregation message from spreading any further. Birmingham's police chief, Eugene Bull Connor.
The so-called Negro movement is a part of the attempted takeover of our country by the lazy, the indolent, the beatniks, the ignorant, and by some misguided religionists and bleeding hearts.
Do you think you can keep Birmingham in the present situation of segregation?
I may not be able to do it, but I'll die trying.
Overcoming Bull Connor's segregationist zeal, not to mention his jails, would take something special. And in the winter of '63, King would find out just how special that effort needed to be.
He spent all of January, February, and March 1963 training people to accept nonviolence, to go down into marches and be willing to go into Bull Connor's jails. But Connor's jails were so fearsome that no matter how much they exhorted people, no matter how many freedom songs they sang, how many prayers they prayed, how much fervor there was in the meetings, people wouldn't show up to risk going into those jails.
With the campaign paralyzed by fear and defeat looming, King put his reputation on the line. Defying a city ban on demonstrations, he led one from the front. As King was led off to jail, a new group emerged from the shadows.
He's in jail. He doesn't know if the protests are going to continue or whether Bull Connor is going to win. Then the young people enter the Birmingham struggle.
I don't mind suffering at all. And I will suffer some more just for my freedom. I want equal rights. I want equal rights.
These young teenagers essentially saved the movement.
Violence against the civil rights demonstrators was going on spasmodically. But Bull Connor and his dogs was on national television. Everybody in America saw that. And most everybody that saw it was shocked, was really shocked. The pictures were so shocking that it raised the moral issue of what kind of nation is America? Are we a country better than this?
As the Birmingham campaign escalated, King moved around the country. What he saw surprised him and altered his thinking about the future of the movement.
Dr. King came out of Birmingham, traveling around. Instead of going into towns and giving a talk in the black church, there are 15,000 people at the airport, and they're mixed black and white. He says, we're on a breakthrough. We have to take advantage of this. We have to have a national protest, call Philip Randolph, and say his idea that he's been thinking about to revive and have a national march on Washington, we need to do it now.
A. Philip Randolph was the founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters in the 1920s. The sleeping car porters were black workers in the railroad industry. There was a time that blacks did all kind of work in the railroad industry, but as the new technology came, they were dismissed, and whites took the job. The one thing that could get organized and would remain African American were the sleeping car porters.
Universally recognized as the dean of the civil rights movement, Randolph had earned that title in a 40-year fight for racial equality.
A. Philip Randolph was in fact the first black leader to advocate mass action. He understood that the only way to make progress in this country was not only through mass action, but that you had to center your activity on Washington, D.C., on the Congress and on the president.
A. Philip Randolph told me the story when he was a young man leading demonstrations. President Roosevelt and Mrs. Roosevelt, who had invited him to dinner. During the dinner, A. Philip Randolph outlined all of the issues and things that he thought that the president should act on and respond to.
By the time it ended, Roosevelt said, Mr. Randolph, with all that you said here tonight, I'd ask you to please go out in your world and make me do what you've asked me to do.
A. Philip Randolph went back to the people that he knew held a meeting and said, now we're gonna march on Washington. And the president signed the Fair Employment Practices Bill within days.
Negroes want the same things that white citizens possess. All of their rights. They want no reservations, and no force under the sun can stem and block and stop this civil rights revolution which is now underway.
Randolph would organize 2 further marches on Washington in the 50s. On both, he would be helped by another figure, Bayard Rustin.
Everybody knew Bayard was an organizational genius. He had been a member of the Young Communist League. He had been a conscientious objector during World War II. He served 18 months in federal penitentiary for that. And of course, he was gay. And he never hid that fact.
Rustin was also an old ally of Martin Luther King. It was a relationship formed during the momentous event that launched King on the national scene, the Montgomery bus boycott of 1956.
Mr. Randolph spoke to Dr. King in the early days of the Montgomery bus protest and suggested to him that Bayard would be a real help. From that period through 1960s, Bayard was in virtual daily contact with Dr. King.
At the height of the desegregation battle with Bull Connor's forces, Rustin traveled to Birmingham. And when Bull Connor turned the city's fire hoses on its black children, Rustin was on hand giving advice. One important piece of advice he would give came in the form of a message from A. Philip Randolph.
A. Philip Randolph sent Bayard Rustin down and said, look, rather than keep this a Southern black movement, we need to organize a march on Washington that would make it a national movement.
Randolph had been stating in public that there may be a need for another march on Washington in the early 1960s. The Kennedy administration, which had come in with so much hope for civil rights, had faltered and was almost terminally hesitant to do things.
In 1960, John Fitzgerald Kennedy became the new president. From the beginning, Kennedy's message of hope and freedom struck a chord with many across the world. At the height of his travels, the new president's commitment to democratic values would also embolden many closer to home.
I have already talked with the president about issuing a sort of second Emancipation Proclamation. The shape of the world today does not afford us the luxury of such an anemic democracy.
2 years into his presidency, however, very little had happened on racial equality at home, and many, including King, began to lose patience.
President Kennedy has done some significant things, and at the same time, I must say that President Kennedy hadn't done enough, and we must remind him that we elected him.
The president let King know that it made no sense to go forward in the first session of Congress with the Civil Rights Bill.
Vivian Malone and James Hood are students who had been admitted to the University of Alabama, but the University of Alabama had refused to admit them.
The person refusing the students' admission was none other than the state governor.
As governor, I am the highest constitutional officer of the state of Alabama, and I will be present to bar the entrance of any Negro who attempts to enroll at the University of Alabama.
When you have a governor standing in the way of executing a federal court order, you know, any president is going to have to take a stand on that. That pushes Kennedy to recognize that he can't avoid this issue anymore.
As the university crisis unfolded, the Kennedy administration also found itself confronted by an equally urgent set of problems elsewhere.
All of these demonstrations are breaking out in hundreds of cities. You know, 200 people going to jail here, 500 people going to jail there. His advisors came to him and said, this is going to not die down. The only alternative is to bite the bullet and propose a bill to end segregation.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. We preach freedom around the world, and we mean it. And we cherish our freedom here at home. But are we to say to the world, and much more importantly, to each other, that this is a land of the free, except for the Negroes?
It is a remarkable speech in history in the sense that it was one more day's demonstrations made him call his advisors in and say, that's it, I want to propose this bill. And his advisor said, when? And he said, tonight. And they said, what?
Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act, to make a commitment it is not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law.
By the time Kennedy made that speech, King had already begun his post-Birmingham tour across the country. That tour would convince him that Randolph's March on Washington idea was the best way forward, and he began to say so.
we are calling for a non-violent, peaceful march on Washington. We want to go there not by the hundreds, not by the thousands, but by the hundreds of thousands. We are determined to be free in 63.
In a way, you've got two streams coming together. The political stream that Kennedy had making that speech and King's protest stream planning to have a march. Now they've got a bill that the president has introduced to have a march for. Randolph wanted the march to be about jobs. King wanted it to be about freedom. Randolph is saying we may need to march to try to push President Kennedy into doing the right thing, the same way we pushed President Roosevelt into doing the right thing in World War II.
On July 2nd, 1963, the first meeting of the March on Washington Committee would take place in New York. For 4 months, Randolph had been planning for just such a meeting.
In January of 1963, Bard and Norman Hill and Tom Kahn drafted a memo to Mr. Randolph, essentially saying, now is the time for a march for jobs and economic freedom.
We met several times in Bard Rustin's apartment and came up with a plan. This plan we presented to A. Philip Randolph well before the critically important meeting of the Big Six civil rights leaders that actually decided and agreed that the march ought to take place.
A. Philip Randolph, Negro American Labor Council; Whitney Young, the National Urban League; Roy Wilkins, the NAACP; John Lewis, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee; James Farmer, Congress of Racial Equality; and Martin Luther King Jr., Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The leaders of the 6 biggest civil rights organizations. On July 2nd, 1963, Randolph will chair their first meeting.
The march will be held on August the 28th, and it will have a twofold purpose. Number one, to arouse the conscience of the nation on the economic plight of the Negro 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and to demand strong, forthright civil rights legislation, the President's proposed civil rights bill.
A. Philip Randolph calls people together to New York to meet about how are we going to stage this march. And by June, they're meeting with President Kennedy.
We, as a group, were invited by Bard Rustin, along with A. Philip Randolph, to attend a meeting with President Kennedy in late June of 1963. It was in that meeting that A. Philip Randolph spoke up. He said, Mr. President, we're going to march on Washington. The people are restless. The black masses are restless.
The Kennedy administration was a reluctant partner when it came to the march. The president feared that it might turn violent, and if it did, it would kill any chance for civil rights legislation getting through the Congress. He tried his best to talk the leaders out of the march. And when he found that they were not talkable-outable, he joined the march.
Despite agreeing to support the march, the president had something else on his mind that day.
President Kennedy took Dr. King out into the Rose Garden and said that he was receiving a lot of pressure from the FBI and others that this movement was heavily infiltrated by communists.
He said, the FBI has determined that there are two top communists from the Communist Party of the United States among your top advisors. They are Stanley David Levison and Jack Hunter Pitts Odell. And you have to get rid of them immediately.
I was operating two jobs, direct mail fundraising, and then I was director of voter registration. So when President Kennedy told me he got to fire Jack Odell, Dr. King said, well, I told Kennedy, I don't see where he got the time to be a communist, because he got two jobs with me. And both of them are full-time jobs.
Of the two men he was told to let go as a precondition for Kennedy's support of the march, Stanley Levison was one that King had become especially reliant on.
Levison and King had been close since the late 1950s. Levison did all sorts of advising, political counseling, editorial advising for King. Only in early 1962 did the FBI learn that Levison had become a close friend of King's.
When the March on Washington is announced, Hoover goes to Kennedy and tells him about what he knows about Stanley Levison and his background. And he wants to institute wiretaps in order to see what kind of relationship exists between Levison and King.
They began wiretapping Levison with the support of the Kennedy brothers. But as of the summer of 1963, they had produced not one scintilla of evidence indicating that Levison had any sympathy for communism.
The wiretap on Stanley Levison became the predicate for all of the wiretaps, including the wiretaps on Martin Luther King, including wiretap on Bayard Rustin, including the wiretap on Martin Luther King's lawyers.
By late July, innuendo and rumor from these wiretaps would be news on Capitol Hill. As the iconic figurehead of the impending march, King was faced with a stark choice: lose presidential support or turn your back on two friends.
Jack Odell was finally let go. But clearly, in order to demonstrate to the Kennedys that we had severed our ties with, quote, a known
story, is that he has 3 strikes against him. He's gay, he's red, and, he's black.
So we had a caucus, and we made a decision that we would recommend that A. Philip Randolph be the convener. So Mr. Randolph, in his own way, selected Bob Rustin as his deputy.
Roy Wilkins said to Randolph, you know his background. All the segregationists are going to use this to attack the march. And Randolph said, I will be responsible for him.
How many roads must a man walk down before they call him a man?
Once Rustin was formally in place, he and his staff had 8 weeks to pull off one of the biggest political demonstrations in American history.
Before she sleeps in the sand. Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before...
Martin Washington, may I help you, please?
Bob Rustin, with the help of A. Philip Randolph, and a young woman by the name of Rochelle Horwitz, put together the march?
The answer is blowing in the wind.
Bayard set the tone. Work began at about 9 in the morning, ended at 11 at night. Sundays was for staff meetings. Nobody quit before Bayard quit. This was 50 years ago, so there was no email. There was no fax machine.
Bayard had asked that each civil rights organization loan 2 people to work on the staff. And for a good 6 weeks, we worked 6 days a week and 18-hour days. I don't ever remember coming in before 10, 11 o'clock at night, you know.
Another figure who will play a crucial role is Norman Hill, one of the original architects of the march.
Norman played an incredibly important role when the march itself began. He was the field organizer. If one had to get Roy Wilkins, Jim Farmer, Whitney Young, and SNCC and John Lewis to say, we're going to work and play well together, it was magnified on the local level.
What I actually did was travel from city to city by bus, train, or plane. The purpose of my traveling was to organize and develop local coalitions. They would work to generate participation in the march from their city.
Watch your Washington buttons right here for Joe. We're taking 25-cent donations for these buttons.
They would raise funds to enable those lacking the means to go to Washington, D.C.
Freedom Now movement, hear me. We are requesting all citizens to move into Washington, to go by plane, by car, bus, any way that you can get there.
My job was to get as many black people from the South to come up to Washington as possible. I went out talking to groups of people. I talked to them about the horrible violence that accompanied the racism that I'd grown up with. And I usually came back with enough to charter another bus.
Another figure who would prove invaluable throughout July and August is Hollywood star and entertainer Harry Belafonte.
I went to California, spent endless days talking to artists, some of the great profiles of the day. I would then tell John Kennedy and others, you'll have such an array of superstars. There'll be so much high-profile presence.
We will march in Washington on August 28, 1963, along with hundreds of thousands of our fellow Americans.
Harry was the Pied Piper and the conscience of the civil rights movement in the arts community.
Rights legislation. We will march because we recognize the events of the summer of 1963 as among the most significant we have lived through.
By simply getting them on the phone and talking to them, he was able to persuade Charlton Heston, who became the so-called chairman.
Ossie Davis, Ruby Dee, Lorraine Hansberry, Rita Moreno,
Marlon
Dick
Brando,
Gregory, Blake Edwards,
Shelley Winters,
James Garner,
John Houseman, Steve McQueen, Sammy Davis, Tony Bennett.
By early August, news of the impending march was everywhere, but the responses were not always what the organizers anticipated.
When white Americans heard the idea of large numbers of black people coming together in Washington, they immediately thought of riot. Black people get together, riot. They immediately thought this is a terrible thing to do. They're going to do terrible things. They're going to riot in the streets. There'll be fights. There'll be everything.
As the date of the march loomed, a president about to propose a civil rights bill found himself increasingly drawn into a spiraling fear of impending violence.
We want citizens to come to Washington if they feel that they're not having their rights expressed. But of course, arrangements have been made to make this responsible and peaceful. This is not a march on the Capitol.
Caught in a flurry of international dignitary visits, the president sounded upbeat whenever pressed about the march. Behind the scenes, though, things were rather different.
The original objective of the march was that it was supposed to be outside Congress. And the president, particularly the Attorney General, they were absolutely appalled. They were frightened.
There was very heavy debate on whether he should endorse it, because the thought was it could become violent. He would have sponsored a gathering of violence, and it would be bad. So he signed an order which allowed for immediate implementation of federal troops to be ready in case there was violence.
Part of what also happens with these meetings with the Kennedy administration is a decision to kind of moderate the idea. If you're going to have a march on Washington, have it well under the control of established organizations, and most of all, to have it a one-day march and that everybody involved is out of town by sundown.
Those of us who were younger yelled at Bayard, "How could you do this? Give it up." And Bayard said, now, the more people we have, the better this march will be. So we went to Plan B.
August 27th, 1963, the night before the march.
The anticipation in the city was measurable. You could feel it. People did not have any sense of what might happen.
The March on Washington today.
We are the dream, but we must turn that dream into demands. Demands for real justice.
And how it all began 57 years ago.
Could you tell us what your thoughts are at this moment, sir?
Oh, I'm just tremendously moved.
From the documentary, The March.
Mr. President, we're going to march on Washington. The people are restless.
White Americans heard, they immediately thought they're going to riot in the streets.
Everywhere you look, you saw black and white people.
The long-awaited march for jobs and freedoms. Brother John Lewis.
I said, this is it. And I went for it.
These people don't know it, but they're about ready to go to church.
The March on Washington.
Hello, I'm Deborah Roberts, and welcome back as we continue our special presentation of The March, a documentary narrated by Denzel Washington. It's now the morning of one of the most important events in American history. But will the crowds show up and the voices of protest be heard?
I'd finished my first year, and during that time, when I began to hear there was going to be this massive march on Washington, I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I definitely wanted to be there. I managed to find a ride with an NAACP group that was leaving from Indianapolis on the night before the march. The bus went overnight, so I didn't get a lot of sleep.
Daybreak, August 28, 1963, the morning of the march.
We went on over to the march site. There weren't many people there when we got there. And I remember just saying, I hope they come, I hope they come.
We got up at the crack of dawn and I made the banners for the buses. You're a teenager and you know that this is something you need to do just because all of these people around you are inspired and inspiring you to do all of this. Once we got out of Jersey, then you're hitting Philadelphia and Delaware. You're in dangerous territory.
The plane will leave at midnight, and we will arrive in Washington at 9 a.m. in the morning. When we arrive at 9 a.m., there will be a press conference with our group as well as the people coming in from New York.
Chartered planes that came from California, chains that came from New York, and everywhere, laden with the greatest artists that day. We closed the theaters on Broadway. Some of the studios suspended shooting for the day. So these stars from, the most visible to show up.
It wasn't until, I guess, about 7:38 that we saw people coming up the hill that we breathed a sigh of relief. They're here. People kept coming and coming and coming. And we knew from the moment the crowds began to arrive that we had a success.
As you came toward the Washington Mall, you began to notice that the buses with signs on it. And you got a sense that something really special was happening.
I remember watching the first arrivals. It was my first major assignment. It was all fairly basic equipment, and not knowing whether it would work, I began to feel nauseated. And I started sipping Coca-Cola and chewing Tums, and nothing helped, and I went down off the steps into the boxwood, and I threw up.
The long-awaited march for jobs and freedom on Washington, D.C. has started, and it started early without its scheduled leaders. About 10 minutes ago, the march began, broke out.
I'll tell you, when I began to really feel good was when Joan Baez sang, "We Shall Overcome." You just felt, this is it. This is okay. This has got it. And you could feel everybody going, yes.
It was, in some ways, my best contribution to the civil rights movement. It was making what I call salt and pepper audiences. People come to me years and years later saying they were standing next to somebody from the school and holding hands singing "We Shall Overcome." Those stories are so moving to me.
By 9:30, 40,000 people were at the meeting point of the march.
I'd hammer out danger, I'd hammer out a warning.
Cars and buses had arrived from Alabama, Mississippi, and every other southern state. By 10 o'clock, 972 chartered buses and 13 special trains carrying 55,000 people had left New York. By 10:30, 100 buses an hour would be arriving in Washington.
Well, I got a man, and I got a band, and I got a...
Was an action to assemble and begin the march for freedom now.
Despite the growing numbers, not everything was going according to plan with the march. As the thousands moved toward the second site, a simmering dispute over one of the speeches threatened to derail all of the hard work.
John Lewis showed copies of the speech to me and to Bayard, and we loved it. We thought it was the greatest thing in the world. There's a young man who worked on our staff, Courtland Cox, and there was a press table. And I remember Courtland rushing past me saying, I'm going to put John's speech on the press table. And I said, don't do it. The first call that Mr. Randolph got was from Archbishop O'Boyle. O'Boyle said he would not do the invocation if John gave a speech.
That hit us like a ton of bricks. For us, it was a collective statement for SNCC and not John's speech alone. I was very upset about it. We all were.
With the march in progress, threats of a boycott also arrived from another unexpected quarter. Aspects of John Lewis's speech had so alarmed some members of the March Committee that they too were threatening to walk.
In the text, I suggested that if we do not see meaningful progress, the day may come, but we may be forced to march through the South the way Sherman did, non-violently. And the other leaders said, no, 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 you can't use that, John. That is too inflammatory.
Randolph said, you know, even though I sympathize with a lot of the things you're saying, you're going to have to change it. He said, you know, I've been trying to achieve this march since before you were born, and I don't want to see it ruined right on the eve of this march.
We got to the Lincoln Memorial, and the program had started, and Jim Foreman of SNCC and John were there, and they were working out what could be taken out without compromising it. And virtually until the last minute, they were both working on it.
Assured that the speech would be changed, Archbishop O'Boyle agreed to the invocation.
Our Father who art in heaven, we who are assembled here in a spirit of peace and in good faith, dedicate ourselves and our hopes to you. We ask the fullness of your blessing upon those who have gathered with us today.
By lunchtime, over 150,000 people had assembled. And cars, coaches, and trains still kept coming. In the sweltering August heat, performers and speakers took to the stage. By early afternoon, over 200,000 had filled the mall, one of the largest demonstrations in American history.
For 100 years, the Negro people have searched for first-class citizenship. I believe that they cannot and should not wait until some distant tomorrow. They should demand freedom now, here and now. I have some 1,500 names here.
You see Burt Lancaster one minute, and Robert Ryan the next, and Paul Newman, and James Baldwin, and Lena Horne, and Sidney Poitier. Everywhere you look, there were these nuggets of celebrity.
everywhere you look, you saw black and white people. It was a great feeling to be privy to that, to see it, and to see the mix of colors who were there, putting themselves on the block to say, I am who I am. That's why they came. That's why I went.
By late afternoon, John Lewis had finished making changes to his speech, and he was ready to be introduced by A. Philip Randolph.
I have the pleasure to present to this great audience Brother John Lewis.
I went straight to the podium.
And I looked straight ahead. I said, this is it. And I went for it.
Hundreds and thousands of our brothers are not here, but they're receiving starvation wages or no wages at all.
The fact that John Lewis gave the second most talked about speech at that march that was unique for many reasons, among them little cultural things. He didn't use the phrase Negro. He said black people.
We must get in this revolution and complete the revolution. On the Delta, Mississippi, in Southwest Georgia, in the Black Belt of Alabama, in Harlem, in Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and all over this nation, the black mass is on the march for Georgia and freedom.
Lord, if you leave, Lord, if you leave your child, I cannot make it, oh,
Finally, the man most people had come to hear.
Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
It was the first time most Americans heard a complete King speech. It was televised from start to finish. Here you heard a whole speech in which he was speaking not just for the aims of black people, but for the destiny of American democracy.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
I was 9 years old, and from what I had gathered from the zeitgeist, from family members, my community, I knew that this moment was going to be a seminal moment for us.
There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as
We all saw that there was no fear. We saw his value system, his point of view about us all as human creatures. Once we saw that in him, our instincts moved us closer.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
As he got to the end of his speech, Mahalia Jackson kept saying,
Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream.
I'm standing about 50 feet behind Dr. King, okay? And I watched his demeanor change. And I turned to the person next to me, and I said, these people don't know it, but they're about ready to go to church.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream.
All the speeches that he ever made came together in that one moment. And the best of every speech was to be now revealed in the context of this great historical moment.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. Let freedom ring from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Being there is one of the highlights of my life. I felt clear about being an American and being a Black American. What Dr. King was saying was really so simple.
Everything that has happened to me, my ability to be liberated, completely free, determining my own destiny, owning myself, happened because of that moment.
The Kennedys were worried the very moment the march appeared as a realistic possibility. But after the big event, the leaders of the march go to the White House. This is a coming together of the Black civil rights movement and the Kennedy administration.
President Kennedy stood in the door of the Oval Office, and he greeted each one of us. He shook our hands one by one. He said, "You did a good job. You did a good
which has just ended. When we come back, a new look from 2020 at how the struggle continued in the years after. That historic March of 1963 was an incredible turning point. So what happened in the days after, the years and even decades after? Our new history lesson picks up now, taking us from Black Panthers to Black Lives Matter.
I pledge to carry the message of the march to my friends and neighbors.
It was just the most overwhelmingly incredible day for me.
Fatima Cortez Todd was a wide-eyed 18-year-old at the time who traveled by bus from New Jersey.
It was very positive, moving forward kind of stuff. It was a very kumbaya environment, you know, and it was a very inspiring time.
The actual success of the March on Washington was it signaled, we come here now to dramatize this shameful condition, and we go back. We go back to the South.
An energized generation kept right on marching after D.C. a year and a half later, enduring brutal violence at the historic Selma to Montgomery marches. Those efforts led to another huge breakthrough, passage of the Voting Rights Act.
It's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome.
By the end of March 1965, Lyndon Johnson was introducing voting rights and ending his speech with, "And we shall overcome." You know? So, I mean, I have seen the world turn, and I've seen change that I never thought was possible.
But as the decade went on, patience began to wear thin, and the peaceful optimism from that August day in D.C. competed with the emergence of more militant voices, like the Black Panther Party.
We believe that people need to be educated if we're ever going to defend ourselves against the fascism that's running rampant in the United States of America and all over the world today.
We moved from civil rights to calls for Black power. If you look at what was actually happening in streets of urban America, we were not realizing the promise of inclusion.
Then, in April 1968, the man whose words rang out so loud and clear at the March on Washington, silenced by an assassin's bullet in Memphis.
You know, after Dad's death, there were over 100 cities that went up in flames. That's certainly not what he would have wanted. What my father used to say was riots are the language of the unheard. Where they have no option, they resort to violence.
There was also a fierce backlash when it came to actually implementing those landmark civil rights laws. In the 70s, communities like South Boston were torn apart by court-mandated school busing, intended to force desegregation of schools.
Even after we won laws, those laws had to still be actualized, right? Because just because you get a federal law doesn't mean a state is going to want to follow it.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God?
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
45 years after the March on Washington, thousands again flocked to the nation's capital to witness another transformative event, the inauguration of the nation's first Black president.
There was hope that the election of Barack Obama to the highest office in the land would finally sort of tear down the barriers of racism, but that's just not how it works.
Obama may have been president with all the stuff going on that was wrong, but he was not God, and he could not spin a magic wand.
It was a sad irony that during the very heart of Obama's presidency, that the country was racked by the highly publicized killings of unarmed blacks by police, including Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Philando Castile.
Trayvon Martin could have been me.
35 years ago.
And that one case that led to the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, the killing of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman.
We, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
The eruption after the acquittal of George Zimmerman was absolutely the moment that birthed Black Lives Matter. I think that there's a lot of pent-up angst that explodes on July 13th, 2013 in response to that acquittal.
Black Lives Matter quickly blossomed into a potent social and political force, aided by cell phones and social media, which spread the ugly face of racial injustice for all to see.
I've never seen anything like it, and it's a result of our cell phones. It took us 3 months to organize Birmingham, and then only 55 people showed up to go to jail with Martin Luther King. They can get 55,000 in 15 minutes.
Now, many members of a younger, socially aware generation look back at the March on Washington with gratitude, but also with what they regard as the event's limitations.
It was a huge moment. It was an impactful moment, but many women were left out that were at the core of the movement, and those who actually did the work behind the scenes who didn't get as much credit.
I think that the organizers were trying to engage in a balancing act between making themselves feel safe to power in Washington, D.C., while still advocating for the Black community. And had they been willing to maybe follow the advice of younger and more spirited activists like John Lewis, perhaps we'd have been able to get even further.
I pledge my heart and my mind and my body unequivocally and without regard to personal sacrifice. How do you pledge?
I pledge to carry the message of the march to my friends and neighbors back home. And the audience, everybody said, with all my heart. We did not live up to our pledge. Because if all 250,000 people who were at the march did this, we would not be in this mess we are in right now.
This is the moment that has ignited the movement of today.
We have to be the change.
And this is the face of 46-year-old George Perry Floyd Jr., a father, a brother, a friend.
George Floyd became the straw that broke the camel's back.
He enjoying that right now, bro. For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we saw a man pleading for his life.
The niggers.
And all the officer had to do was just to stand up or move from his throat. And perhaps this man would have been alive.
Attorney Lee Merritt says little has changed since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about the dream back in 1963.
Dr. King said police brutality more than he said integration. Police brutality was a major civil rights issue of that time, and it remains so today.
4 police officers have now been charged in George Floyd's death. Officer Derek Chauvin, who knelt on Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes, charged with murder. The 3 other police officers charged with aiding and abetting murder and manslaughter. The 4 have yet to enter pleas. And just this week, another black man, another violent confrontation with law enforcement. Unlike George Floyd, Jacob Blake survived.
He was not treated like a human that day. He was treated like some foreign object that didn't belong. I don't care how he comes out of this, but my brother made it because he is a survivor.
Blake, who had an open warrant connected to a domestic case, shot 7 times in the back after police responded to a domestic disturbance call at his address in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Riots have broken out in Wisconsin, and the state's Department of Justice taking over the investigation.
Mr. Blake admitted that he had a knife in his possession. All involved law enforcement officers are fully cooperating with DCI during the investigation.
So far, no charges against the officers involved in Blake's shooting.
Police brutality is state-sanctioned violence.
When they're doubling down on an abusive system of policing that's stealing the lives and the dignity of Black people, we don't have anything to lose.
On average, the American police population kills about 3 people a day, roughly 1,100 people a year. That is not something that we as a society should come to accept.
Michael Brown, Sean Bell, Elijah McClain. So many killings, so much of an impact on the Black community.
I haven't cried one time. I stopped crying years ago. I am numb. I have been watching police murder people that look like me for years. I don't want your pity. I want change.
And now is the time, agrees Reverend William Barber, for the change to begin.
We are going to decide now that with every breath we have, we're going to breathe freedom and justice and love into this democracy, and we're not going to stop.
You see a willingness of folks to step out fully and completely and really seize this moment to usher in real visions of freedom.
Just this week, several pro athletes taking a stand against brutality, refusing to play their regularly scheduled games.
We are all fighting against a system of racialized control. Right now, it's mass incarceration and police brutality. But the fact is, it's just a systemic racism directed at the African-American population.
Actor Kendrick Sampson says he experienced police violence while protesting in Los Angeles.
They brutalized us, shot us with rubber bullets, beat us with batons. Watch out, bro, don't touch me. I have a permanent wound on my chest, and then I have some very visible ones, 5 on my leg, and those are from rubber bullets.
But racial bias goes deeper than police brutality, says Reverend Barber. It's deeply ingrained into the fabric of society, he says, and can't be limited to a single issue.
Systemic racism is massive voter suppression. Systemic racism is the resegregation of our public schools. Racism is mass incarceration, and it is the racist application of the death penalty.
Some insist the road to reconciliation must include a kind of financial compensation for the crimes of the past.
I do not know how that would be implemented, but I do know that reparations were made to the Japanese, and reparations were made to the Jews, and they figured out how to do it.
And if we're not looking at reparations, we're not getting to the root of the problem. We're not seeking justice, true justice.
And true justice, says Reverend Barber, transcends race.
We must bring together an intersectional coalition of people of every race, creed, color, and sexuality.
You have to mobilize, you have to organize, you have to strategize, and then you have to vote in every election, not just this most important one coming up, but every election.
Congressman John Lewis penned some final words of encouragement for today's young leaders, writing, "When historians pick up their pens and they write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation that laid down the heavy burdens of hate."
We are going to be a great generation. My grandfather predicted this very moment. He said that we were moving into a new phase of the struggle. The first phase was the civil rights, and the new phase is genuine equality.
I think the story of the 21st century will be us, Black people in this country, realizing our own power. I know that we will be our own authors.
When we come back, what is it that keeps this movement going forward? And a special performance. Stay with us.
Let all rejoicing rise high.
The gift of life is such that no matter the handicaps and the obstacles, each of us is held responsible for learning to love, learning to see the mystery and the marvel of the human race.
So if we want to see this next generation of leaders go further than the generation behind them, we need to continue to stand with them. We must engage and empower them.
Our streets! Our streets!
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
Black Lives Matter has given us a continuation of we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal.
What we see in this moment is a willingness of people, young and old, people of all races, being willing to say, I don't have anything to lose by imagining and building something new.
All of us have to roll up our sleeves. We have to work for change, and we have to be the change.
Lift every voice and sing.
What matters is lifting up the human dignity of all humankind, that every human being has worth and dignity.
Lift every voice and sing.
Till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Thank you.
What a night of history, a day of history, separated by 57 years. The march may have gone virtual in parts, but it's still asking the same basic questions, demanding the same basic rights. Something to think about as you dream tonight. I'm Deborah Roberts. For all of us at 2020 and ABC News, good night.